Good morning, Laura from sunny Calgary. Thank you so much for joining me. How are you doing?
Great. It's my pleasure to be here. And it is sunny for the first time in a very long time. So I'm very happy about that.
Yes, amazing. For our guests, please, could you introduce yourself and tell us just a little bit about what you do?
So as you said, my name is Laura Kohler. I'm a senior knowledge and research advisor at CAWST, which I think is kind of an unknown title, but basically I joined CAWST to do a bit of knowledge management and research specifically around sanitation. My background actually is in engineering, and I have a PhD in civil engineering, but the focus of that work was the management or understanding the factors that lead to ongoing performance of on-site systems, so septic tanks and latrines. So after joining CAWST, the focus has been how to bring that expertise, but also working with partners and in sanitation to provide those technical professional development opportunities. And I'm from the States, but I live in Calgary, and that's about it.
Yeah, perfect. I was actually reading up on CAWST. It was a few months, it was last year when I first started following you guys on Twitter. And just based on my research, CAWST has been around for a very, very long time, and has done some amazing work projects. I know that I think maybe the initial focus was water, but then obviously evolved more into sanitation when people got more aware of the issue. So my question is, when did sanitation become a priority for CAWST?
Yeah, so I think you're right. The CAWST, when it started, was really focused on household water treatment, specifically even started around the BioSan filter and some technical expertise, growing that technical expertise, and then being able to kind of disseminate that with other organizations all over. But I would say that from early on, sanitation was there. It maybe wasn't on the same scale in which we were doing water. So like the earliest sanitation trainings, I can't even remember the date, were still pretty early on, but they were focused on like environmental sanitation. So looking at like all the different kind of pathways in which, people can get sick, and looking at barriers to prevent that kind of contact at the household level, from managing having a system at the household level, and then things like managing animal waste on the property, things like that. So it was a much broader look at sanitation. And then there's also for a very long time been a focus on the kind of correct decision making and construction of latrines. So that was another area of focus. But I think probably 2016 was when CAWST started to look at FSM and the kind of broader scope of sanitation. Obviously, they had that environmental sanitation, but looking at the entire value chain. And since then has done quite a bit of work to not necessarily technically address all the aspects along the value chain, but work with partners that do address those different aspects and kind of complement what they do with some of our learning expertise. So I would say most of we've created new materials, and I should say co-created a lot of new materials, but the focus kind of grew as we saw opportunities to partner with organizations that were really tackling the problem or the challenges in different regions, and to the table we were bringing some of the experience that we had designing these opportunities. So I always say there's the content of like a learning opportunity or a training, but then there's the how in which that's done. And so CAWST has had a long standing doing participatory adult-based learning, and that's had it's been a need, and and there's been a lot of opportunity to partner to bring that into kind of the first FSM and now the CWISE discussion.
So this participatory adult training, tell me how that happens. what led you to do this in the first place, and what are some of the results?
So I would say that there's a lot that's come out of like the education sector. Maybe sector is not the right word, but in terms of like, I think how do people learn, and like when is that, what's that perfect moment in which, especially as like established, I'm going to use the word professional. I know we could use practitioner, private sector actors, whatever, but the idea is, I think of everyone, it's their profession, they're doing it. So as professionals, we do have expertise, and I think there's a difference between like, I think at the foundation is this understanding that everyone's coming to the table with already having expertise, already being competent. And so instead of being a one directional training, the way it's designed it's more of a facilitation. There is content being shared. It could be, some through like a lecture, but the idea is to really solicit that expertise from the learners themselves, and then obviously build it. So I think that's kind of the idea behind adult-based learning, and obviously that participation, instead of just having people in a room and telling them the information they need to know, it's about a discussion. And in that learning process, you end up tackling some of the more contextualized challenges, and it allows the learner to really take what they need to go do their job. So it's not necessarily a one size fits all. And I think the other piece about, it's probably for all learners, but it's like particular to adult learners, is that we learn, like, I think about like the moments when I've learned, when I've really needed to have the information, I can go out and I would like Google, a how-to on Excel. And in that moment, I look at, how to do that task in Excel, and I immediately learn it. If I had done an entire course on all the features of Excel, but at that moment after I didn't need it, it wouldn't necessarily, I wouldn't be able to internalize it and actually put it to practice as easily. So I think it's also about finding those right moments.
Right.
And then just recognizing that, like, kind of what drives the learning is the need. So it has to, thinking about exactly what it is that, that individual might need for their profession kind of helps design the learning opportunity. So, yeah.
That's great. So with that being said, where have you worked around the world in terms of this education and training? Like, I'm curious.
The hope was to scale capacity development services that are required to be able to deliver, inclusive sanitation services. So to do that, we did a broader landscaping to see like who are these suppliers of capacity development, and also to understand a bit what is the demand for it. So where which stakeholders need what. And essentially from that, we've kind of identified a couple newer partners. One is IT and Buit out of Bangladesh, and then AFWA, based in Cote d'Ivoire, but is a Pan-African organization, and PASA, the Pan-African Sanitation Actors Network, that is also a Pan-African, association of sanitation actors, including emptiers. So since then, we've been doing that type of work. And again, it's those organizations have very strong mandates to serve, to provide capacity development to different stakeholder groups. And our role is to really kind of take our expertise and complement what they're doing for that common outcome. So that's what we're doing now. And then outside of that, there's been a lot of, CAWST has done a lot of like work at a kind of a smaller scale or a shorter term, providing technical, advisory around selection and construction of latrines. More recently, there's been a lot of work being done in Liberia to, with latrine design. One of the it's not a growing challenge. I think it's just that it's, some of us have become more aware of it recently, is the idea of collapsing latrines. So like unstable soils, and how the construction of a latrine, if not done well, or if not the appropriate design selected, then things like emptying aren't even possible, because the stability of that latrine is, when they go to empty, the sand, kind of gets as they pull out the sludge, sand gets pulled, and then it creates this instability and it can collapse. And of course, other things like flooding can do that too. So there's been a lot of, kind of one-off opportunities to kind of work around that in the regions where that's an issue. I can't speak to everything, but I would say like those are the highlights. There's we still, I would say, have a larger portion of the work focused on water, but even as I speak now, sometimes I forget how much, like, we're a relatively small organization. I feel like we have touch points in a lot of areas, and even I feel like sometimes don't realize because of my blinders up on the work that I'm doing. So anyways, yeah.
I think it's amazing just hearing about your approach, especially in terms of collaboration and how you do that. I think just hearing you speak about being cognizant of what people need and having them sort of guide the discussions and, hey, this is what I need, and then you responding in like, okay, so this is what we can do for you. I think that's really great. I think a lot of some development organizations can sometimes come with like this top-down approach, and this is what we do, this is some money, this is what you should use it for. There's always sort of conditions attached to some of the work that some organizations do. Yeah. And so just hearing your approach is very refreshing. And yeah, I love that. It seems to be like embedded in your values. So that's really great to hear. Would you say that's true? You guys, do you talk about it a lot internally as well?
Yeah, so I would say that is true. And I think one of the things that we talk about is, the cost associated with that, of course. Like, it's much easier when you have something that's very easily measurable to say, like, this is what we've invested and here's the outcome. I think one of the things that I've learned about CAWST over the years, it's been quite unique, is the amount of time that you can dedicate and just accepting and working at a pace that is suitable for the partner or client. And we use two different terms, clients or partners. So the idea is that it's never a one-off thing. So it's never like, this is the task that we're doing and now it's done, let's check it off. And actually right now CAWST is really investing a lot, especially for some of the water focused work that we're doing on what they're calling the client journey. But essentially what it means is like that it's not about having a one-off kind of touch point and being done. It's about where do they come in, and like how do we support them along their journey. I feel sometimes silly saying it, but the idea is that again, like, you need things at different points in the work that we're doing. And I think the value that we have had is that we're available to support along that, along that entire like timeline. Yeah. And it's not just like about doing a one thing and calling it good. So I think it's there, and I think it is a challenge. And I think I mean, obviously we face those challenges when it comes to trying to find funding, of course, but we've been really lucky to have some of that more flexible funding to be able to take on that approach. So,
yeah, amazing. That's really amazing. Now I'd like to ask about your fantastic podcast, which basically it takes academic papers and distills it into more digestible information. So as you said before, sometimes there's all the information, but then there's the how and what afterwards. Okay, so how are we going to implement this? So that's what CAWST podcast deals with. Tell me about the journey, your podcasting journey, how it's going and what's coming.
So the podcasting journey started, I think it started earlier than last year, but really making it a reality came last year. But I've been, over the last years, I've heard it more than once, like there's got to be a better way, or at least a complementary way, to be disseminating information or knowledge. And a lot of what we have as tools right now are these written reports, written publications, that they're brilliant, but the number of people, most people have busy days, and I think sometimes finding the information, even knowing, which publication it's in, is a challenge. And it isn't always, I'm very admittedly like not a very good reader. I've done a PhD, and I can tell you I've had to do it, but it's not my go-to in terms of learning. So I think there's part of it was also creating something that would have served me as a learner, to get through all the number of publications that I, want to get through, but have to, it can be painful. Anyway, so the conversations have happened over the years, and sometimes it feels like, okay, there's got to be this, like, there's got to be another way to do it. And I don't know. I don't know how podcast came to my mind. I just felt like that was it was the obvious like option, but I knew nothing about podcasting. And I think, last year at some point I was like, okay, I'm just going to dive in and see what this, what this looks like, what this would look like. So did some kind of like self tutorials again, learning at the point when it was needed, to kind of like learn like the basics, and then just went for it. And I've been working with Dorothy from AOVAG to kind of develop out the series. And we agree, like we hear it all the time, and like just trying something new and seeing how it was received was kind of, it wasn't something that was like really arduous. We just went for it. But we only had three episodes last year, and I think probably from doing your own podcast that it takes a lot of time. So this year we at first were very ambitious, thinking we would get maybe 9 episodes, but now it looks like it will be 6. So but the whole idea is finding really kind of relevant research that's coming out, or publications that are coming out, and being trying to identify like, who is this for? Like, who should be reading this paper? And like, what's the summary? Because again, like I think sometimes we think of everyone having the same need, but some of the information that's coming out has a very specific use for, a specific audience. So I think trying to structure it that way to identify who could be putting this to practice, and then just breaking it down in like simple language to help with that. And of course, just having fun doing it as well.
Yeah. So question, you mentioned, so not everybody, with all the research that's coming out, it's not for everybody. So people will have particular interests, So just to bring in pit emptiers, sanitation workers rather, into the mix. I know there's been a lot of talk on bringing them into the conversation, and having them lead the conversation, since they are the direct implementers of CWISE. But also more involvement in like conferences and discussions and webinars and all of these great things. I know you actually, CAWST actually led a fantastic pit emptying series. It was last year. So shout out to that. If anyone hasn't seen it, we'll link the training. Is the training like publicly available yet, or?
There was the recorded webinars, and
yes,
I do think they exist. I will have to connect with Kelly.
Okay.
There is something to link. There is something to link to.
Okay, amazing. But yeah, just bringing them into the research and point. Is there any information you think sanitation workers should be knowledgeable of, or should know, that you think they're currently not receiving?
So I wouldn't isolate them among, above any other, sanitation actor. I would say there are areas, and that they need, of course, support, but and what those areas are is going to be very specific to the individual or the organization that needs it. So within that pool of emptiers, you have anyone from an established business that is, delivering or offering services using the mechanized equipment and have very established systems and fleets of trucks or things like that. And then on the other end of the spectrum, you have manual emptiers. So I think the needs can be very different. I think one of the things that specifically that webinar focused on was, instead of standing back and looking and kind of observing and saying, these are the needs they have, we asked the webinar. So Kelly, who worked with Dennis from Sanitation, they put together that webinar series to really solicit that information specifically for manual emptiers, which is not an easy task to be able to identify them, bring them into the conversation, and then of course have them in an online forum. It's a very it's something we don't think about, but I would say, of course, there's a lot of needs, but the reality is like, what are the needs from their perspective is something that the whole focus of that series was about. And I know it's ongoing. There's discussion about how to continue that community of practice to still create that space for manual emptiers in particular to represent themselves and what they would like from, I'm going to use the word again, supplier of capacity development services. Those organizations that are out there wanting to be supportive, what do they want from us? And I think that's kind of the ongoing challenge. Not just bring them in kind of and serve them based on what we think they need, but in fact bring them in and have them be part of that discussion. And so, I would say we a couple years ago now did a full competency framework, and that was done with emptiers. So it's done with these sanitation service providers, again, on that spectrum from anywhere from, a manual emptier to, a business owner that has several, he has a fleet of trucks and is well established. The idea was to kind of catalog, one, to find what is an emptying service. When we're looking at it, it's not just in isolation, it connects to other parts of the value chain. It connects to the household, and it connects often to the municipality or utility that is in charge of or is operating maybe the treatment facility. So the idea was what does that service look like, and looking at it from those perspectives, from the household perspective, what is the good service, what would a quality service look like? From the business owner's perspective, what does that mean for them and their success? And then also looking at the city level, what is, when it's fit into the larger picture, what does that look like from the municipal or utility perspective? And then they outlined all the knowledge, skills, and attitudes that it requires to do that job. And so I think that's, again, what are the top ones that you would have to ask on a case by case basis, but there's a catalog of all the knowledge, skills, and attitudes required, identified by 60 plus emptiers from all over Africa, to kind of guide any sort of support that could be given to them.
Yeah, that's fantastic. So they not only are they directly implementing CWIS, but they are generating knowledge for us to use as well. It just goes to show how valuable sanitation workers are, and how we just need to be doing more for them and with them, especially. So that's amazing to hear. So to add on that, we know that climate change is a huge deal, to put it lightly. And I feel like within more WASH organizations, climate change and FSM or CWIS, they are slowly merging together, to form a way forward where both can coexist, because both issues are really important. So I don't I don't know this for sure, but I feel like in some areas, maybe climate change is more of a buzzword, and climate change is more, and in some other places it's more removed, like climate change doesn't really affect us, like we have other things to be worrying about, especially in places where, you know, there's the low income, for example, like climate change is probably not at the top of the list. So also, I just want to get your opinion on that, and what you think is happening and what's the way forward.
Yeah, it's a great question. I would say that climate change is affecting everybody everywhere. Maybe it's just about recognizing it. And of course, I think with the number of challenges, or, you know, in terms of like the complexity of the services, it's easier to kind of focus in on one thing and kind of put blinders up to like focus on that, because there's so much to do. You want to be able to get something done. And then when you add in like the complexity of climate change, of course, it just kind of opens that Pandora's box again. It's like you kind of focus and hone in, and then all of a sudden you add in climate, and then it can make it far more complex than it was. So I don't really, I think one of the realities is that it is, whether it's like water scarcity or flooding, it is going to affect sanitation wherever you are in the world. And what's interesting is that I had seen this in 2013, actually, when I was still working in the US with on-site systems in the US. But we had a flood, and one of the things we don't think of, this was in Colorado, in the US. But one of the things that we don't realize is that we often talk about like the resilience of these systems, and they can be like, instead of like a network system where a failure can put the whole system offline, with, you know, these decentralized options, a couple of households lose their system and the rest will continue to function. But we don't think about how you know, a major event can actually put offline quite a few systems. And one of the things we don't think about often is where the demand to bring it, like the resilience piece, where does the demand fall? And when it's decentralized, often it falls on the homeowner. So a system breaking, and I can go back to like the unstable soils and latrines. When one of those systems collapses, it means that they're buying or installing a new system when it's failed. And it was the same thing, you know, it's the same thing globally. So when you start to think about it, it may look resilient, but we haven't really thought through the implications for homeowners, and maybe, you know, in terms of communication of those risks to homeowners, you know, when they're thinking long term, like we don't want sanitation for the moment, we want it, you know, over the long term. So that needs to be something that's being discussed, because we can't promise that type of, you know, event won't happen. And the only way to recover from an event like that is to have planned for it and have thought about, like, okay, when a system fails, you know, how does that kind of replacement or rebuild look, and who pays? And I think what was interesting, again, working in the county where I was working, was that the flood was in 2013. In 2016, when I was leaving Colorado, a large percent, I wish I had the number, a large percent of those systems had not recovered. So, and like, again, we like, what does that mean? Like when they fail, it can fail in a number of ways. If you empty a latrine or a septic tank right before a flood, which often is the practice to avoid, you know, cholera outbreaks. So the cholera outbreaks, they empty them to remove, you know, the pathogens and make sure that it doesn't end up in the streets. But you have an empty tank, and then you have groundwater levels that can rise, and then the tank actually floats. So you can get cracks there. The failures can be invisible. So I think the reality is you can't decouple them, but it is challenging to, like, it becomes just far more, it's far more complex. Like and I would say, like, at this moment, it's more about like having those discussions, and even like, it's not like I have a solution by any means. Mm-hmm. And I don't think any organization does, but I do think I think more than anything, we've hit a point where we realize you can't not talk about it and like start adding it into the conversation, because that's the reality.
Yeah, no, especially in some of these sanitation tools that are being used. So if like a city planner wants to use a sanitation tool or an FSM tool, like what you said about factoring in their like particular climate and planning for the future, I think that's a huge thing. So we definitely need to take that into account. I just don't, like you said, I don't know what the best way or to do that is, but the fact that we're aware of it,
it's good.
It's a start, to say the least.
We need to do a lot more, but yes, it's gonna be, at least we're talking about it now.
Yeah. Laura, just to wrap up the conversation, is there anything that is on your mind that you want to share with the sector, the listeners, anyone that's been pressing on you recently that you just want to share, or we can end it here? It's no biggie.
No, what's interesting, amazing. And I don't know, I don't think this is rocket science. I think it's well known, but I do think one of the things that in the work that I've done over the last years, especially related to capacity building, and I mentioned this a bit earlier, was the how of capacity building, I think is something that gets often overlooked. And I would say that we innovate all the time in this sector. There's business models, there's technologies. We're thinking through different ways of providing these services. And financing, innovative financing and innovative regulation. So I would just say that it's the same for these opportunities, these learning opportunities. I think when we say capacity building, we often our brain goes to like a training, and I think it's sometimes when I talk about it, I always go to like where everyone else is going to connect. So training is like the obvious, but I would say that it doesn't mean that all learning opportunities have to look that way. And I think, again, like, I think that's not rocket science. I think that's well known, but I would say that generally there's a need to innovate, to kind of design and be able to offer opportunities for professional growth that are suited to the needs, but that also are designed in such a way that they actually support the learner or the individual who's participating in that activity to be able to take action after that opportunity. So I think that would be the one thing that I would say. It doesn't come up that often. I think we get into like topics and like competencies that need to be addressed, but we don't often talk about how that's done. And the papers to practice was one of those kind of ways of doing it. There's trainings. I know FSMA and CAWST, we just did the skills challenge. Like there's ways to kind of like flip, get away from the kind of traditional ways of doing learning and find opportunities to do transformational, like design transformational learning opportunities like the skills challenge. And I think it's needed. Like, I absolutely think that like, if we can't innovate our learning opportunities as well, we won't be able to grow the human resources to provide the services that we're trying so hard, or I shouldn't say that are, being offered so globally. So I think it's something that I would like to see talked about a bit more. And that's it.
I wholeheartedly agree with you, Laura. Thank you for making that very important point. And I hope to all the listeners, you are writing notes and thinking about this as well. Thank you again for speaking with me. You've been a lovely, lovely guest. And I know we're going to work together in the future. I think we're cooking something up right now, if I'm not misunderstood. So eyes out for that. But yeah, for now we say bye and thank you again.
Thank you so much. This was fun and really great to be on and be a guest.
Amazing.